Welcome! I'm Carolin Taron, and today we're doing seasonal cultivating in the gardens. And it's so nice to see all of you, and I hope you're doing well. And I can't see you in person at the moment, but the next best thing is I can see you here and you can see me. And for those of you who don't know me, I have been gardening since I was a wee thing, and I'm also the coordinator and founder of West End Flower Fairies. We have started, with West End Flower Fairies, we have started 6 community gardens in the city, and I like to transform public spaces everywhere, and hopefully today to inspire you. So, thinking about seasonal cultivating, we're thinking about cultivating in the broadest definition, thinking about tending, fostering our gardens. So today I'm going to go through some suggestions for each season, ways that we can cultivate our gardens to make them grow and flourish even more. So I thought we'd start with where we are now today, in the middle of summer. Some of the things that we can do at this time of year include deadheading and cutting back, which is really important if you want to continue growing a plant. It helps keep the plants bushy, alive, and growing, which is what we want right now. If you have any perennial flowers, like coreopsis, a lot of them will also benefit from cutting, deadheading, snipping back. Hollyhock, biennial, it'll keep flowering for quite a while if you take the seed heads off. And then again, just wait until maybe September, and then you can start collecting seeds. I also am a strong believer in cutting back basil blooms just before they flower. You keep the plant strong, and when you cut back and like pinch off the top, deadheading, you make the plant bushier, which is wonderful and what you want. And then if it's a true species of basil and not irradiated, then you can start collecting the seeds in September. So lots of things can benefit from being cut back. Perennials, a lot of things will just keep flowering. And it's something that we need to consider in public spaces. You know, if you had your own like large garden, you could keep certain areas for collecting seeds. And you can maybe have a small area to do that in your community garden plot. Yet in public spaces, we need to keep the areas neat and clean. So, and ideally blooming. I find also in these spaces that keeping things blooming makes people more respectful. If you have any rugosa rose, that if you keep cutting the blooms, you will keep having these amazing smelling roses, which I just love. And they're just ready to bloom again because I cut them back last week. And another important thing to point out this time of year is to keep, not so important of the rugosa rose, but in general, keep paying attention in summer to leaves. Look at the underside of leaves to see for leaf damage. Remove any damaged leaves. Ideally, don't put them in your compost. Put them in the yard waste. And as I discussed in the last workshop, Eco Garden Remedies, that often insects, more often earlier in the season, leave a trail, like the Colorado potato beetle leaves a definite trail. And if you can stop the Colorado beetle in its tracks earlier in the season, the prevention is paramount. It just can make such a difference. You can really stop a lot of damage. So just, cultivating your garden in the summer is really about paying attention, snipping back, pinching back, cutting back. we'll move back to the roseberry, not the rosemary, I was thinking of rosemary earlier, the raspberries. And if you have ever-bearing raspberries, you probably know this, but maybe you don't. If you snip the hip every time you harvest a delicious fruit, then you can have raspberries fruiting as late as November, depending on the weather. So that's the case if they're ever-bearing. I will also show we have black cap raspberries back here that only fruit once. They do need quite a pruning right now. But I haven't visited a hardware store in a while and all my pruning shears are broken. I really could use some pruning shears for my birthday. Just a hint. But, sorry, I'm often silly in the morning. Either way, let's go to the raspberries right now. Now welcome to the back gate of the Emerson Community Garden at the alternate exit of Lansdowne. This, the gardens I started with the TTC actually inspired a mandate in 2001, 2002 to inspire subway stations citywide now, which mostly Leaf has taken over. Can't think of it right now, but Leaf. Either way, if you see a community garden at a subway station, you can think of us. Well, welcome. Come into the back. A lot of native plants in just a small food area, but we'll first of all stop at the raspberries. So when there are a number of hips that haven't been picked, someone who didn't know and harvested raspberries without taking the pit or the hip, then they shrivel. And if these are left, you won't have any raspberries if it's an ever-bearing plant. But if you keep pruning them, as I said, you will have many lovely raspberries late into the season. Which are lovely. The other thing that's valuable thinking about if you have raspberries, which I believe some of you do, to just cut back any of the shriveled leaves. Because of COVID this year, I didn't get into the garden as early, and so I didn't do as thorough a pruning of this raspberry in the spring, which I'll go, we're going to reach spring at the end. But ideally, raspberries are best, I believe. Some people think the fall. I'm a spring pruner for raspberries. So, but if you have dried leaves at this time of year, summer, just cut them off. As a general rule, if you see any dried, shriveled leaves of any plant, you just keep the plant healthier and bushier if you can cut it back. The other thing to consider in the summer, we don't have any potatoes in this garden, but we have some squash. This one, it's just planted in this little space. You grow where you can. I need to add some soil there, yet you can see how it's climbing up here. Squash and potatoes are best hilled, so you keep mounding the soil around the root of the plant. And I know nutritionally that makes a difference for the potato plants as well. And the plants are just happier. And obviously beans can be hilled as well. We're all doing in the gardens as best we can with what we have. Yet it's good to have the information to always know for another season. So summer is a wonderful time to do the pinching, snipping, hilling. Today it's not as much an issue with water, but deep watering is always important. And also to consider, if you're invited on a spontaneous camping trip or lucky you to a getaway for a couple days, on these hot days, make sure you ask for help with watering, because even with deep watering, if you're away for more than a few days, is really good to consider asking for help with watering, because a lot of your tender plants might get really burned in the heat. And that helps me segue into the importance of mulch, which I did discuss in the Eco Garden Workshop. This is also a good time of year to add more mulch to plants. Just going to move over here. just bring this over to the veggie area. Cedar mulch, you can also, straw is also really wonderful. I didn't have extra straw for this garden, but I brought it to the other garden. But just adding some, like the uncolored, particularly if you're growing vegetables, just the uncolored, untreated cedar mulch can be wonderful for perennials and herbs to add some to. I can demonstrate that when we move over here. Yes, and also just want to mention, most herbs benefit from cutting back, but this is a good time of year to cut back your lavender and harvest it, and then it will keep flowering. Actually, if you don't cut back the lavender, it will just shrivel up, particularly if it's a new plant. Some gardeners suggest cutting back the lavender as soon as it starts to flower. We haven't done that here, but I find as long as you cut it back when it's still flowering, you'll have a nice harvest, and it'll keep going again. And as you can see, we've added mulch here. These plants really benefit from mulch, all the perennials. Yeah. Oh, and the other thing I really wanted to remember to mention that's really valuable to do in terms of cultivating our gardens in the summer is side dressing. I actually did that on the weekend, and we'll move over to our veggie area in a moment. Let's bring some of these things that I'll need later. Side dressing is simply adding compost in this time of year just to the side of your beds or around plants, just maybe every few weeks, just giving your plants a bit of a boost with either compost that you can access, worm compost, hen manure, some really good quality organic sheep manure. Stay away from commercial fertilizers, and that can be really valuable. Also, as we'll explore further in the next workshop, which is garden remedies, is compost tea, which you can make with comfrey or nettles or seaweed or compost. Can be really valuable to water your plants with, especially when they're dry, just to give them a boost. And in the next workshop, we'll explore what kind of nutrients they provide. It's like all over wonderful nutrients. It's like making a really wonderful smoothie for your plants, the way you might for yourself. And I know I feel wonderful when I have one of my power smoothies. Okay, so perhaps we'll move over to the vegetable garden, and I'll just discuss a few things there. As we segue, we're still into summer in real life, but we're going to start exploring late summer and fall, what activities we can do then. And here's a little bit more snipping to do. I just consider the snipping or deadheading like meditative. Some people really love it. I'm grateful when there are some community gardeners in one of our gardens, that's their favorite thing to do all year. And just as like a meditative practice, and it really keeps things blooming. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I'm a great believer in planting seeds, continually. So ideally, beans and greens you can plant every 3 weeks in the garden. Generally, a little while after the new moon, I plant more seeds. And often, if you have planted spinach or radishes early, which are more early spring things or cool weather crops, you might have space after you've dug them up. So this is a wonderful space then to plant beans or hardier greens. There are some lettuces that are a little hardier. I find I think it's called a trout lettuce. I love it. It's has some red veins in it in green. Also, you can plant, basil we can only plant when it's warmer. So you can pop in some basil seeds after the new moon, and then you can fill up spaces. The other thing that I wanted to remember to mention, it's not really an issue here, but it might be an issue in your gardens. Make sure to restake your tomatoes or other plants, beans and such, in the middle of the summer if they need it. I mean, obviously it's better to ideally to stake your tomato plants when you first plant them when you're small. Inexperienced gardeners so often, or novice gardeners I'll say, often plant, these little wee tomato plants and having no idea how big they can become, and they'll plant them very close together and without staking them. Sometimes if they're together, they will sort of support each other. Ideally, it is better if tomatoes can have more space, just like all of us need more space right now, and to stake them in the beginning. But this time of year, it's just good to sort of maintain what's already planted, plant more seeds after the new moon of beans and greens and basil and things like that. Then as we move on to, and also of course, it's time in the summer to start harvesting. I love patty pan squashes. And they are a wonderful thing to plant late spring, because you will be able to enjoy them often even before zucchini, and you can cook them up basically the same. Or as I gifted one of the gardeners with one yesterday. She said, well, I'll just look it up on my phone, and she did. And of course, if you are growing beans, as you probably know, it's the more you pick your beans, the more beans you'll have. And they're just so lovely. Some beans you can eat just like that, and others are better steamed or sauteed. So you can keep picking them, keep planting the seeds. The other thing that I really appreciated learning about beans a number of years ago is that you can plant beans much closer together than I ever thought before. Like, I do not follow the package directions. I plant beans, like the seeds, really close together, and if some of them perhaps are a little too close, I might thin some of them out. But they don't actually require thinning as much as other plants, and we'll discuss thinning in a moment when we move more on to late spring. So moving into considering late summer, early fall, is the time, if you have tomatoes falling to the ground, make sure to gather them up. If they're still green, put them on a windowsill, let them ripen, or put them in a paper bag. Also, it's also really important to keep cutting back the raspberries and staying aware of fallen fruit to prevent too many wasps around your garden. Although wasps do have some benefits, obviously as a gardener you don't want to attract too many wasps. And if you have sort of fallen, broken fruit on the ground, you can attract that around your ankles. And I have been stung around my ankles more times than I'd like to admit. So just a little thing for prevention. The other thing, late summer, early fall, depending on their temperatures, you can start planting some cool weather crops again. I often plant another wave of kale, which then I'm often ready to enjoy in the early spring, just because it'll have stayed in the ground. So that's another lovely thing. And also late summer, fall, it's good to keep deadheading somewhat, but maybe not as much, and start thinking about seed saving, which we will explore in September. I do love seeds, so I hope you can join me for that workshop. And I do love seeds, and I love seed saving. What else to consider late summer, early fall? As we segue into early October, yes, that's really what I want to mention. Oh, one of my passions is growing garlic. I really like to encourage everyone in Ontario if you have a sunny spot in some fertile soil, or soil that you can make even more fertile, grow garlic. Yes, I probably have a poem about it somewhere, but it's not on the tip of my tongue right now. So it's so much better to grow our own garlic, obviously, rather than having it shipped from miles and miles away. And I generally grow garlic new moon, early October. That's my plan. And as you may know, these are smaller heads. They're just some of the ones I just harvested as I was leaving the garden. They were just calling to me. But generally, when you're growing garlic, pick the fatter cloves, fatter heads of garlic, and then plant individual cloves as fat as possible, and just, well, I don't know, maybe 5 inches down, water them well, and then next, often late June, you can start enjoying scapes, which I think I've picked all, oh, no, I picked all the garlic scapes. Well, yes, I did. I picked all the garlic scapes. Sorry about that, a little bit of moving around. But I love garlic scapes. So then that's something you can enjoy early. It's the curly part on the top, and just wonderful to saute or to add to garden pesto. And then at this time of year, mid to late July, I am harvesting garlic, which I love. And then I store it inside or in a shed or garage if you have it, to let it dry for a while before I eat it. But sometimes I'm so eager that I actually, clear off the debris and harvest the first ones, and they're particularly pungent. I really love them. And also, as you probably know, just a little aside, garlic cloves are wonderful to plant next to rose plants or fruit trees, because they work like just supporting a little bit of natural antibiotic support for rose bushes or fruit trees. And as we move into fall, later fall, this is the time, depending again on the weather and our changing climates, to start thinking about putting your garden to bed. And as I mentioned before, if you have green tomatoes and there might be a frost coming, bring them inside at a window and put them on a windowsill or in a brown paper bag, and then you'll be able to enjoy tomatoes for quite some time. Also, in terms of putting the garden to bed, remove any damaged leaves, cut back some of your perennials, but leave some of the perennials for the birds, for the seed heads. It's a really good thing to do. If you have access to clean leaves or straw, which is wonderful, put that on your bed, your garden beds, just to create a nice spot for the garden during the winter. And also, at first frost, if you're able, it's wonderful to add some compost to your garden. And then winter, I think winter is really a time for learning, for dreaming, for planning. And as I meant to mention earlier, all through the seasons, it's really wonderful if you can use a garden journal. Make notes of when things bloom. Make notes of what insects you see and patterns that you observe in your garden, and then you have this to reflect on for the next season. It can be a very valuable learning tool and often prevention. So then from winter we emerge into spring, and spring can be so changeable in Toronto. And as the weather is a little bit changeable now, but I will make my way through spring quickly. So spring, great time to add more compost, to remove any damaged leaves, to start cool weather crops. Ideally, if you can plant perennials too, like rhubarb loves to be planted in the spring. Perennial lovage, which is a herb in the celery family, loves to be planted in the spring and can be enjoyed early in the spring. And also spinach, beets can be planted pretty early, and make sure to soak your beet seeds. and other greens. I mean, lettuce you have to sort of see with the weather. If you like some flowers, and they do attract these wonderful little wild bees, I like to plant as many poppies as possible, and like the annual poppies, and they like to be planted early. They have even survived frost, so I plant them after the new moon. And I think that might be one of my other gardeners over there. And yes, so it is wonderful to cultivate our gardens and our lives in every season. Paying attention to what's growing, paying attention to what we want to be growing, and also taking time to reflect on successes and challenges and what we might want to do differently next season. So I have such gratitude for being able to garden in the city, and I imagine you do as well. Thank you so much for this time, and I hope I've inspired you at least a little bit. See you next time. The next workshop is Garden Remedies. See you then.